Test, test, test. Good afternoon.
Call the subcommittee to order. Today is the first hearing in a series on what government does to help low-income families get ahead, whether that is effective and how that can be made to work better. We will start with a review of our current system and how much we spend, but more importantly, whether that spending is effective in encouraging work and higher earnings by low-income individuals. So let's consider two facts. Fact one, we are spending more than ever to assist low-income individuals and families. According to the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, last year the federal government spent about $600 billion on just the 10 largest programs, which is over 10 times the $55 billion we spent in 1972, when half of these programs did not even exist. Fact number two, despite all that spending, it's not clear that these programs are offering real help. For example, despite record spending, this is the slowest economic recovery in recorded history, with far too many families unemployed and living in poverty. Together with these facts, this makes it hard for defenders of the status quo to say all is well, especially across the 83 programs the Congressional Research Service has identified as assisting low-income families. And these facts make it even harder still for the millions of American families without stable work and reliable incomes, as we now enter the fourth year after the recession has officially ended. Today, we will ask whether there are features of today's low-income programs that lead to little excess in helping adults go to work and increase their earnings. As we proceed, I note we are intentionally taking a broader view than just those programs within our subcommittee's specific jurisdiction. Our programs are key benefits for low-income families, but they do not represent all that taxpayers do to help low-income families. To really understand what is going on, you have to look at the big picture. So that's what we're going to do today, and that's what we're going to do in subsequent hearings. We are pleased to have a number of experts on these programs with us today, including someone who can provide firsthand explanation, and this is something that I insist upon. I always like to hear from those folks who have received help or have been seeking help and didn't receive help. We all can learn a lot from that kind of witness. And so we welcome Shade Randolph, a former client of American Works here in D.C., to tell her important story. We're looking forward to that. Given the broadness of our topics, one hearing couldn't possibly do them justice, so our next hearing will build on what we learned today by exploring what really works to help families, and whether that knowledge drives what we spend our taxpayer money on. Finally, we will consider options for reform, including how we can work with our state partners to better coordinate the current maze of government programs to better serve families in need. Our goal is to help more low-income families leave poverty and achieve the American dream. That's not the Republican goal, it's not the Democrat goal, it's the goal of every one of us on this dais and every one of us in this room, I'm sure. And the fact that too many of our fellow citizens have seen that goal slip from their grasp in recent years is our call to action. The status quo is simply not good enough. Spending more money on current programs is not good enough. Reforming programs so they spend smarter to achieve better outcomes is what we all should be working for. That's the challenge ahead of us. I thank you, and Mr. Doggett, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are all committed to making every government program work as effectively and efficiently as possible for both the beneficiaries and taxpayers. But any attempt to label programs that are designed to promote economic opportunity or help struggling Americans as welfare doesn't move us toward that goal. I don't think that most folks across America believe that nursing care for seniors, Pell Grants to assure that young people can achieve their full God-given potential, tax relief for working families, the school breakfast program, Head Start, and foster care, to which we devoted considerable bipartisan attention in this committee, that they characterize those as welfare. But there are some among our colleagues who do and did during the last Congress in a call for reducing welfare spending. What I think we need to be focused on is a very specific conversation about how to make those programs under our jurisdiction, specifically the TANF program, actually move more people with existing resources from welfare to work. And I'm committed to trying to do that. The Congressional Research Service report that was referenced in the announcement for today's hearing was put together at the request of Senator Jeff Sessions last October at the height of the presidential campaign. He used that report to support the false claim that the United States spends more on federal welfare than any other program in the federal budget. Now that the campaign's over with, I think we probably leave that kind of rhetoric behind. It does not help us resolve these problems. I asked the Congressional Research Service very recently, in anticipation of this hearing, to do a further analysis of the spending in the top 10 programs that some Republicans have classified as welfare. 49% of that spending goes to our senior citizens, the people that have built this country and are disabled. 28% supports working families and individuals. 8% is for education. 14% is primarily for medical and food assistance, and of course we know there are efforts underway this week to cut 5 times as much from food security as the Senate did in its farm bill. Of the entire total, only about 1% is direct cash assistance to the needy in the form of the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. The written testimony submitted by some of our witnesses here today suggests that helping Americans during tough times will stop them from finding a job. One witness has even suggested that if we just would allow more people to fall into poverty during the recession, they'd be more likely to work. To me, that fundamentally misreads the character of the American people. I believe they want to work. They want to set an example for their kids and do right by their kids. And they want to engage in the struggle each and every day to do just that. We don't need to push more Americans into poverty for them to want to work. This also ignores the many programs within the jurisdiction of our full committee, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit. The Earned Income Tax Credit increases the value of work for anyone moving into a job that pays low or moderate wages. The Child Tax Credit increases the take-home pay of a minimum wage worker. That's not only a major work incentive, but it also lifts over 9 million Americans out of poverty, including over 1 million Texans. Furthermore, research indicates that the efforts to make work pay, like the Earned Income Tax Credit, also help reduce generational poverty by boosting school achievement as well as the earnings of their parents. While the Earned Income Tax Credit and other programs designed to promote economic opportunity help Americans of every race and in every region, I'm particularly pleased that Eric Rodriguez is here today from the National Council of ARASA to talk with us about how critical these programs are in supporting many Latino families as they achieve and maintain economic independence. And in terms of recent efforts to assist people dealing with the severity of the recession, it's worth remembering that much of that assistance is already being reduced. The temporary tax assistance, the Medicaid expansion, the duration of unemployment benefits has also been significantly reduced. And of course, the sequestration across-the-board cuts are cutting into these programs in a significant way. We can do more to promote and reward work. We should, including reviewing and perhaps improving the phase-out points for some of these programs, but we need to do it together with a realistic view of the difference between these opportunity programs and what has traditionally been called welfare. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Dockett. And as you can see from the opening statements, there's agreement that we want to move people from welfare to work, and we want to help people become successful. And there's also agreement that we need to be more efficient in our programs and maybe measure them a little bit more accurately, but some disagreement maybe in how we get there. We'll work on that. Thank you, Mr. Doggett. So without objection, each member will have the opportunity to submit a written statement and have it included in the record. I want to remind our witnesses to limit their oral statements, please, to 5 minutes, and I'll also let you know a little bit of a secret. At about 2:45, 2:50, you're going to hear some buzzers and bells go off. That means we'll have to vote, so be ready for that. But without objection, all of the written testimony that you have will be made a part of our permanent record. And on our panel this morning, this afternoon, we'll be hearing from Dr. Jeffrey Kling, Associate Director for Economic Analysis, Congressional Budget Office, Dr. Larry Mead, Professor, Department of Politics, New York University, Jennifer Tiller, DC Director, America Works, and Shade Randolph, former America Works client. Dr. Casey Mulligan, Professor, Department of Economics, University of Chicago, and Eric Rodriguez, Vice President, Office of Research, Advocacy, and Legislation, National Council of La Raza. Mr. Kling, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Dodgett, members of the subcommittee. Thanks for inviting me to testify. I'm going to do a review of what some of the spending has been on some of the major means-tested programs and tax credits and how that's grown over time and what the Congressional Budget Office projects going into the next decade. So the federal government devotes about 1/6 of its spending to 10 major means-tested programs and tax credits. They provide assistance for health care, cash payments, and help obtaining food, housing, and education to people with relatively low incomes and assets. In 2012, federal spending on those programs and tax credits totaled $588 billion. Medicaid accounted for more than 40% of that spending, followed in size by the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. Total federal spending on those 10 programs rose 6% per year faster than the rate of inflation, or about a tenfold increase in the 4 decades since 1972, when about half of those programs existed. As a share of the economy, federal spending on those programs grew from 1% to almost 4% of gross domestic product over the period. Roughly half of that growth came from increases in spending for health care programs, Medicaid, and to a far lesser extent, subsidies to help low-income people pay for prescription drugs under Part D of Medicare. That spending grew about 15-fold over the 1972 to 2011 period, from $20 billion to $305 billion. People who were elderly or disabled accounted for about 2/3 of the Medicaid spending and all the Medicare spending in 2011. The primary reason for the growth in healthcare spending, which averaged about 7% a year above the rate of inflation, was increased spending per participant. General growth in healthcare costs, shifts in the composition of beneficiaries, changes in the services covered by the program, and the availability of supplemental payments to healthcare providers all contributed to that growth. Had the amount of spending per participant in Medicaid remained unchanged over those 40 years, total spending on healthcare programs discussed here would have been about $88 billion in 2011, or less than 1/3 of the actual amount. In addition to the increases in spending per participant, the number of participants increased from 17 million to 53 million in 2011 because of population growth and policy changes that increased eligibility for Medicaid. Growth in programs that provide cash assistance and programs that help people obtain food, housing, and education were about equally responsible for the other half of the total increase in spending over that period for those programs. Spending on cash assistance programs and tax credits, the largest of which is the refundable portion of the Earned Income Tax Credit, rose from $18 billion in 1972 to $151 billion in 2011, nearly 6% a year above the rate of inflation. Spending on programs that help people afford food, housing, or education, the largest of which is SNAP, rose from $17 billion to $172 billion, also about 6% a year above the rate of inflation in their growth. Unlike growth in spending on Medicaid, which stemmed primarily from greater spending per participant, growth in those programs resulted primarily from increases in the number of participants. If current laws don't change, total spending on those programs will grow faster than inflation over the next decade, but the differences between programs are pretty large. Spending on means-tested healthcare programs are projected to more than double, an average annual increase of 8% above the rate of inflation. That rise reflects expected growth in the cost of providing medical care. It also reflects expanded eligibility for assistance and new types of assistance to be provided under the Affordable Care Act. That law will not only make more people eligible for Medicaid, but will also allow many low and moderate income people who do not qualify for Medicaid to purchase federally subsidized health insurance. In contrast to spending on healthcare programs, total spending on the cash assistance programs and tax credits I've discussed is projected to fall over the next decade. That expected decline mainly stems from changes in the Earned Income Credit and Child Tax Credit, which have changes that are scheduled to occur under current law. CBO also estimates that spending on nutrition and education programs will decline in the next 10 years, partly because spending on SNAP is projected to drop substantially as the economy continues to recover. There's additional details on these programs in a report that we issued in February of 2013, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kling. Mr. Mead, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this opportunity to testify about federal welfare programs. And the question we're asking is what we can do to make these programs more effective in moving low-income Americans ahead. I think that largely means what can we do to promote work and welfare, because it's through employment that most Americans get ahead. I think the welfare reform of the 90s showed essentially how to do that. In the Personal Responsibility Act, we enforced work more firmly than before, but at the same time, we provided new benefits in the form of wage subsidies and child care, make it possible for people to go to work. So we combined help and hassle. We enforced work, we also promoted work. Equally important, the politics of reform was quite constructive. It was strongly bipartisan. Both parties contributed to the outcome, and the upshot was really not to downsize welfare, but rather to change its nature so that it did indeed promote work. And I think my central message today is that we need another welfare reform that will do the same thing in some other programs. I would recommend 3 steps primarily. One is that we need to strengthen the work test in TANF. It does have some weaknesses, and especially the fact that states can sanction families that don't comply only partially and allow the mothers who are not working to keep most of their benefits. I think that's a mistake. We should require that the case be closed in those instances, and I think we would have higher work participation if we did. We ought to have a firmer work test in the SNAP program or food stamps. Food stamps has some requirements on the books, but they're not very strong and they're not well implemented. We need to be more serious about that and require that states achieve certain activity levels as they have to do in TANF. And I would certainly require one parent in a food stamp family, if it's a 2-parent family, to be employed. We should also consider similar requirements in housing and even in EITC, where we commonly think that the credit produces higher work levels. Actually, I don't see persuasive evidence for that. EITC creates incentives both for and against work. I think we should consider an hours threshold. As we do in TANF, we should require for people who get the EITC credit, they should have to work 20 or 30 hours a week rather than just whatever hours they choose. If we did that, I think we'd see more impact on work levels. The second thing we should do is institute a work test for men. Well, how do you do that when the men are not usually on welfare? Well, what we can do, first of all, is have a higher wage subsidy for single workers without children, most of whom are men. They should get a better subsidy, but at the same time, we should enforce work for groups that are supposed to be working. And I'm thinking in particularly men who owe child support and aren't paying, and also men leaving prison on parole. These groups are supposed to work, they often don't do so, and states have begun to institute work programs to enforce work for those groups. So again, the combination of help and hassle of benefits with requirements. The single best thing this committee could do to promote that development is to allow the funding for child support work programs to be reimbursable under Title 4D. This is, I think, an essential change, which I hope you will consider. The third thing that we should do is rein in the disability programs. They are growing too rapidly. We have too many people on both Social Security disability and especially SSI. We need to reconsider the idea that disability is open and shut, that either you're disabled or you're not. It would be better for the recipients and for society if we had partial disability, partial benefits, coupled with some activity requirements where we expect people to work to a certain extent or engage in community service. We can't simply create a massive disincentive to work by giving people a pension where they never have to work for the rest of their lives. Indeed, they can't work. We have to get away from that and both tighten up the rules for eligibility, but also to have some kind of activity requirement for those on these benefits. The Europeans, by the way, are ahead of us in this. They're starting to do this, and we need to do it as well. Another thing they've done in the Netherlands is to require employers to be the initial funders of benefits for disabled people. So they don't have an incentive, as they do now, to shift our workers onto SSI rather than unemployment insurance, because they don't pay anything for SSI and they do for UI. We need to consider requiring the employers to get some skin in the game. So I think disability programs are also important. In my written testimony, I consider a number of other impediments to people working that are often cited: disincentives, lack of jobs, inequality, a couple of others. And I want to emphasize that I think none of these are really very important, and we shouldn't be distracted by them. We can talk further about disincentives. You're going to hear from Professor Mulligan about that. I don't think it's very important. And we should focus instead on building administrative work tests where we actively tell people you have to work, and we oversee to make sure they do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mead. Ms. Tiller and Ms. Randolph, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. America Works started in 1984 as the first for-profit welfare-to-work company in the United States. Operating for 12 years before welfare reform, America Works placed welfare recipients into private sector jobs. Armed with knowledge and data, we lobbied Congress for nationwide welfare reform. After almost 30 years, America Works has broadened beyond welfare recipients to include returning prisoners, food stamp recipients, non-custodial parents, homeless individuals and families, veterans, those with HIV/AIDS, and the disabled on Social Security disability insurance. Over the years, we have worked to get 350,000 people working in different states and cities throughout the country. As you can see from the document that was submitted on Friday, in New York City, we are measured against all competitors and are consistently ranked as the #1 performer. We know that following is essential to our success. Over the years, America Works has taken on tough social problems which cost the taxpayers billions of dollars with the belief that, if a job is provided, dependency on the government diminishes and disappears. To that end, we have rapidly attached ex-offenders to work, therefore reducing recidivism to crime. We have taken people with a lifelong benefit of SSDI and gotten them employed and independent. America Works has taken people out of homeless shelters and showed that by providing jobs, we vastly decrease the cost of homelessness. If work were the central social policy through which each problem is examined, we could create productive citizens and lower our expenses. America Works pioneered the Work First model. This has been critical to erasing years in which welfare recipients spent in and out of education and training programs which seldom led to jobs. When the regulations were being written for welfare reform, states were limited to a very small % of people allowed to be in education and training programs. This forced employment first and training later for upgrading and improving prospects. America Works pioneered performance contracting, meaning you only get paid when and if you get someone a job and they actually keep the job. This technique forces greater productivity and outcomes. Unfortunately, most efforts still reimburse employment activities based upon line item budgets, not job outcomes. Again, in the attached document submitted on Friday, you can see comparisons between America Works and various state one-stop centers. America Works is operated with voluntary and mandated programs. When we began, everyone was voluntary. In 1996, with the Welfare Reform Act, all of that changed for welfare recipients. Productivity and outcomes vastly increased. Over the years, in New York City, we have seen an expansion into mandatory requirements, not just for welfare recipients, but also for non-custodial parents, food stamp recipients, and homeless shelter residents. America Works recommends the committee to undertake an expansion of work requirements for the growing group of people who receive transfer payments and public subsidies. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I introduce Sade Randolph.
Good afternoon. I attended American Works last year, May of 2012. During that time, it was the same time that I had a terminally ill dad, and also was a mother of a single parent with a son. When I attended American Works, the staff members really helped me in so many ways, as far as interview skills, resume building, any way to properly fill out an application for a job. And doing so with their efforts and also my own determination, I became employed with GEMSEC Specialty Clinic as a medical records clerk. I've been there for a year. And also I had purchased my first brand new car. So I'm forever grateful to American Works.
Thank you both for your testimony, and congratulations on your first brand-new car. Mr. Milligan, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Mulligan.
Chairman Reichert, Ranking Member Doggett, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity and honor to discuss with you today how public policy has changed the reward to work. A basic economic principle is that the monetary reward to working has important effects on how many people are employed and how much they work. People without jobs or otherwise with low incomes sometimes receive benefits from social safety net programs. The benefits are rarely called taxes by laymen, but economists understand the benefits to have many of the characteristics of tax rates because a program beneficiary loses some or all of her benefits as a consequence of accepting a new job. I have illustrated the reward idea in Figure 1. The left bar measures the resources available when working, and the right bar measures the resources the same person would have if not working, including subsidies received net of taxes paid. The difference between the two bars is the monetary reward to working. Now consider adding a new safety net program or expanding an old one. Exactly because it gives more help when not working, the new program reduces the reward to working. The combined effect of taxes and subsidies on the reward to accepting a new job can be summarized as a penalty, the effective amount that is lost from paying taxes and replacing benefits associated with not working. I like to express the penalty as a marginal tax rate, namely as a percentage of employee compensation. If there were no penalty, then the marginal tax rate would be 0. Thanks to a labyrinth of tax and subsidy programs, the marginal tax rate can sometimes equal or exceed 100%, which means that at least as many resources are available when not working as when working. In such cases, a person might have more resources available to use or save as a consequence of working less. Legislation that cuts or credits taxes can nonetheless reduce the reward to working and increase the marginal tax rate if it cuts taxes more for those who work less than it cuts taxes for those who work more. High marginal tax rates are associated with small incentives to seek, create, and retain jobs. The consequences of high marginal tax rates are felt all over the economy, even by persons whose individual rates might not be all that high. At the same time the safety net programs implicitly tax job acceptance, they also implicitly subsidize layoffs because the programs absorb some of the income and production an employer and employee together lose when an employee stops working. Layoff subsidies give employers and employees less incentives to take steps that might avoid or delay layoffs. America absolutely must have taxes and safety net programs, even though they reduce the reward to working and even though they subsidize layoffs. But if this Congress wants to understand what is happening in the labor market or to the budgets of social programs, it would be counterproductive to approximate marginal tax rates as 0 or to assume them to be eternally constant, regardless of what incentives are embodied in new legislation. Of course, unemployment insurance program benefits are now available longer into unemployment spells than they were 6 years ago. But also don't forget that new modernization provisions now provide unemployment benefits in a variety of circumstances when they were formerly unavailable. The food stamp program expanded in a variety of dimensions. The Recovery Act helped unemployed people pay for their health insurance. Figure 2 shows my estimates of 10 years marginal tax rates coming from tax and subsidy programs, taking into account that some of the poor and unemployed do not participate in all, or sometimes even any, of the safety net programs. The combined effect of these and other changes through 2013 was to reduce the reward to work. That is, increase marginal tax rates for most of the non-elderly population. The reward to work will be further eroded beginning in January when several significant provisions of the Affordable Care Act take effect. The new work disincentive provisions include the sliding scale that sets premiums for people who buy health insurance on the new marketplaces, a scheme for premium assistance that essentially resurrects the Recovery Act's COBRA subsidy in a more comprehensive form, employer penalties, and hardship relief from the individual mandate. The cumulative effect of all of this legislation is to increase average marginal labor income tax rates by 10 percentage points over what they were in 2007. A presumably unintended consequence of the recent safety net expansions has and will be to reduce the reward to working and thereby keep unemployment and poverty rates high, keep national spending low, longer than they would have been if safety net program rules had remained unchanged. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Doggett, and distinguished members of the committee. For 20 years, I've worked on anti-poverty issues. It's a great pleasure to be here just to share our perspective. I would just make a few key points in my testimony. The first is that many of the federal programs that we're talking about here are designed to assist low-income families are doing what we've asked them to do and what was intended in many ways. The second is that some of the tax credits that have already been mentioned in particular really stand out in terms of their impact on rewarding work and stand out as a federal policy to reward work over time. And it's well documented, and there's really substantial research to support that. Finally, there's a lot of ways that we can lift up families out of poverty through federal initiatives if we choose to invest more in those key particular areas. So the Great Recession has been devastating, I think, as we all know. The national unemployment rate now is 7.6%, down from 10% in 2009. You have to go back to the early 80s to see a nationwide rate at that level. Today, there are still more than 3 unemployed workers for every job available. At the same time, we've had a housing crisis that took a devastating toll on working families. Substantial declines in household income and wealth, particularly among Latino and African American families, have eroded financial security for all American working families. The federal social safety net includes a range of programs that we've mentioned here that serve non-working elderly, of course, the disabled, children, but also working families and increasingly working families. Programs such as SNAP, Medicaid, TANF are designed to provide basic security and in the aggregate help provide broadly shared financial stability during difficult times. SNAP participation grew, as we've already mentioned, 27% between 2007 and 2009, but as a result of the recession. These programs and efforts are not designed to remedy macroeconomic or labor market issues, but rather to help families deal with the fallout from these macro trends. One of the most valuable and effective responses we have seen come in the form of tax credits. In 2011, just by way of example, the EITC alone prevented 6.1 million people, including 3.1 million children, from slipping below the poverty line. The credit has also been proven to have other positive effects for working families, and again, extensive research is there to support that. Expansions of credits and programs that assist low-income workers have been a central piece in economic recovery, as you've seen. In fact, the safety net reduced poverty by almost half in 2010 by accounting for the positive effect of programs like SNAP as well as the low-income tax credits. Yet some argue that these programs discourage work. In general, benefits decrease as earnings rise, and we know this. But as in the case of the tax credits, policymakers can mitigate those effects through properly designed phase-out rates. But by and large, increasing employment, boosting wages, lifting up income and earnings, and improving levels of wealth for families, as we all want, can be best achieved when jobs and economic opportunity are plentiful. Stabilizing families during an economic downturn is certainly a sensible first step and needed. The evidence is clear that means-tested anti-poverty programs have served as foam on the runway that Main Street needed to soften the harsh effects of our financial crisis. But American businesses are still hesitant to hire. It may take years for the labor market to return to health without further interventions. Targeted efforts to create jobs, such as funding for infrastructure repairs, rebuilding in low-income neighborhoods, are smart, common-sense solutions. Raising the minimum wage, expanding access to paid leave, affordable child care, also all important at rewarding work and important during this time. However, policy does seem to be moving in a different direction, and let me just give you three quick examples. The federal budget sequester, of course, has been devastating on complementary programs. An estimated 270,000 people will be cut from federal job training programs that serve youth. Latinos will lose about 25,000 slots in Head Start programs. The recent version of the Farm Bill also raises great concerns. SNAP has been proven to be highly effective, yet we're seeing $4 billion in the Senate and possible cuts and $20 billion in the House version of the Farm Bill. Again, issues that we're really concerned about. And the Budget Control Act, recently signed, made permanent a lot of the tax credits that were put in place in 2001, but the EITC was only expanded or extended for 5 years and not made permanent. So major concern. So in summary, most of the programs that we're talking about have served the purpose that they were intended to serve. Tax credits remain crucial in this regard, and policy options are in front of us if we can invest in those areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Well, now we'll move into the question and answer phase, and I'd like to begin by asking Ms. Randolph a couple of questions. Have you testified before Congress before?
No.
Isn't this fun?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're having fun. Hey, so we're just going to have a conversation.
Okay.
It's no big deal.
Okay.
We just want to learn from you, because I think it's really important. You've been there, done that. You've been through the system. You're the one. I mean, all these guys are smart guys and gals that are sitting here, but you're the one with the wisdom and the experience, as far as I'm concerned. Okay? So you went to the Department of Human Services in New York, right?
No, in D.C.
In D.C.
Yes.
I'm sorry, in D.C. And you were provided with some benefits.
Yes.
Right? And then you went to America Works.
Yes.
What was different? What was your experience? What's the difference between the two? How did you find yourself becoming successful through what America Works does versus the Department of Health?
Basically, the support from American Works, both in far as finding employment, but also in personal, because at that time I was going through a personal matter. They have helped me with all my, they helped me with so much far as building my confidence, helping me with finding employment, staying determined, staying on track. Even though I had all this going on in my personal life, I had them to come to every day, to talk to also for them to support me in any way possible. When I got there, the team is just great. I love it there. I really did.
What didn't you get at the Department of Human Services in D.C.?
Just the benefits.
Just benefits?
Yes.
So what you really were looking for is someone who could tell you, you know what, Sade, you can do this.
Yes.
I mean, to build your self-confidence, you can get a job like this. You can have a dream.
Yes.
And so how did they help you build that confidence? What were some of the things that they did?
Every day we'll come in. They'll sit down and talk with me if I had any personal issues as far as transportation or anything that'll keep me from getting to American Works. They'll help me with that. Also, helping me with my resume, my interview skills, whatever I needed help with. Also, searching jobs with me one-on-one time was most important to me, and I received that when I got to American Works.
And when you were working with the Human Services, how did you feel? I mean, you're just getting benefits. What were you frustrated? Were you anxious? How were you looking for work?
I was looking for work because I know I'm a smart girl, and I knew that's not where I wanted to be, but I also had a child to feed. So with them, I did become frustrated, but I also was grateful because I had a way to feed my son.
Right.
So I became a little frustrated, but.
You'd rather be where you are today.
Yes.
With a job. Right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Good. Ms. Stiller, what would you say to someone who might look at Ms. Randolph and say she represents a few people who are easy? She is obviously a very bright young lady. Someone who may be easy to find work for, as opposed to many other people on benefits who can't be put to work right away without years of education or training or similar services. How would you?
Generally, everyone that comes to any of our America Works offices are people who, before they met us, were not believed in. So regardless of the duration on TANF or any types of services before, it's building that confidence that Sade referenced. It's advocating on their behalf when it comes to their housing situation or additional benefits needed or child care subsidies. It's making sure that anyone who walks into our office is matched appropriately to a job. You know, work first works best. So we make sure that any individual, we look at their wraparound services that are needed. We offer them a comprehensive approach, but really it's just building their confidence.
Yeah. Well, thank you for so much for what you do and America Work does, and congratulations to you, Ms. Randolph. And
Thank you.
you're welcome. Mr. Doggett, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of our witnesses. Mr. Kling, I know that the CBO has studied a number of times the Earned Income Tax Credit. I think most recently in your November 2012 marginal tax rate report. Does the research indicate that the EITC has helped pull people into the labor market by increasing the value of work?
Yes, Congressman, it does. We have a report that was specifically on the refundable tax credits that's even more recent from January, and that is clearly spelled out there.
And the report I looked at said it makes work more appealing, and that studies have found that expansions of the EITC between 1986 and 1996 significantly increased the movement of single mothers into the workforce.
Those are our findings, yes, sir.
And by boosting the value of work, has the EITC also reduced poverty rates for Americans in low-wage jobs?
That's correct.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, what will be the effect on poor families of significantly changing the Earned Income Tax Credit?
Well, if the changes are meant to make the credit, lessen the credit in some way, or cut back on eligibility in some particular way, I think it would be devastating. I think, as many of you know, the effects of the credits, I think, are proven to reduce poverty, but also on an individual level, many families, you know, they go to work, they look forward to their tax refunds at the end of the year. They use it to pay off bills and other basic necessities. The notion that we'll be reducing refunds in some way, I think, could have a very, very devastating impact and certainly set us back with respect to the recovery.
And Mr. Kling, on the issue of food security and the SNAP program, I believe that CBO projects that the overall spending on SNAP will drop substantially in real terms over the next decade under existing law, if we just maintain the existing law.
That's correct.
And this is based on the premise that the program grew when the recession was the deepest, and we think that's changing. And it accounts for the fact that the food stamp benefit levels will drop some this fall because of changes that are already set to take effect in the SNAP law.
Yes, sir. We think that the economy is on a path towards recovery, and over the next decade, that will have a substantial impact on reducing the amount of expenditure in the SNAP program.
Thank you. And again, Mr. Rodriguez, in terms of what the impact will be on Latino families and other families if the House were to enact the bill that's before us this afternoon. In fact, that's what the bells were ringing about to bring that up. That involves 5 times as much of a cut in the SNAP program as that made by the Senate.
Yeah, as we discussed, the SNAP and EITC work pretty close together to assist families who are working, and as you know, the state and local impacts of EITC, SNAP payments are tremendous on local economies. You know, in Texas alone, 2.7 million households claim the EITC. That's over 1 million families that are receiving those benefits. I think SNAP has very similar overlays, and so you're looking at deep impacts in similar places, and I think we should be very concerned about that.
We've heard substantial criticism of some of the existing programs today from some of the other witnesses. What do you believe are some of the strategies that we need to pursue in order to get long-term reductions in poverty?
Well, I certainly think, looking at the EITC, if for those who may be concerned about some of the work incentives or discouraging, again, I think the phase-out rates offer some, I think, pointers in that direction. I think further work support investments, transportation subsidies, child care subsidies that help workers either stay in the workforce or expand their hours seems to me to be a good direction to go in addition to some of the job creation and job growth elements that I've mentioned before and are in my testimony.
And is early education and avoiding these across-the-board cuts in Head Start a part of that also?
Absolutely. Part of the research that we've seen talk about intergenerational poverty and how that affects, and we certainly have seen research that shows that children of recipients of the tax credits do better in terms of educational outcomes and college attainment. And so I think we would be definitely concerned about the effects on longer-term implications for families as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Doggett. Mr. Young, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing. I thank all our panelists. Ms. Randolph, your testimony was incredibly inspiring to me. And I think the idea here is to try and figure out ways to reform the programs at issue today so that our social safety net does not become a cage for many Americans. Instead, it becomes what it was intended to be, to my mind, a springboard. To go out and realize your capabilities, put those to use, and make a better life for yourself and your family, and you certainly embody that. So thanks for being here today. Times are tough. Some of the solutions I've already heard put forward today with respect to improving the lives of people on the margins of our society involve greater expenditure. I know that argument can be made, but I'd like to invoke the old British saying, which is, now that the money has run out, we shall have to begin to think. It's time for us to think creatively about how a number of these programs are structured, and to do that, I think in some cases it would be helpful to have more information. Prior to 1988, it was impossible to determine what percentages of AFDC recipients were actively engaged in workfare, job search, training, or other efforts to reduce dependence. States actually competed with each other in disseminating misleading data, which implied that most of those who made up their caseload were engaged in serious efforts to leave the government rolls. With the passage of the 1988 welfare reform legislation, states were required to report accurately the activities of their AFDC recipients. It was soon revealed that only a tiny fraction of recipients were actually engaged in job search and training. And that information garnered through those 88 reforms led to the intellectual foundation for later welfare reforms, which incorporated a work requirement to the benefit of people like Ms. Randolph. So my questions pertain to evidence-based policymaking, and they'll be directed toward Mr. Mead and Mr. Mulligan. In terms of other federal programs, such as SSI or SNAP, which programs currently require states to report on the activities of government benefit recipients?
To my knowledge, TANF is the only program that has detailed requirements for reporting on what recipients are engaged in. I don't believe we have that in food stamps or SSI.
Mr. Mulligan, would you agree with that assessment to your knowledge?
The SNAP program has a quality control sample that I believe comes from each of the states. I don't know exactly the administrative role of the states in that, but each of the states is represented there. Department of Agriculture makes it available every year. It's a yearly sample of people who are actually on the SNAP program, type of household they live in, the type of whether they're working,
right,
those sort of issues.
So we've got 83 by my last count, what some call welfare programs. Others characterize that as an unfair term, although I think just about every panelist used that term. We'll call them means-tested federal benefit programs. Just about all of them require no sort of work requirement or even requirement that there be some reporting on the activities related to work or job search of the recipients. Should the federal government extend these reporting requirements to other means-tested government programs in your estimation? And if we should extend these requirements, should we also apply rigorous evaluations to determine the effectiveness of these programs on benefit recipients? Mr. Mead?
Well, in principle, I would favor that, but let's remember there are administrative costs associated with this kind of reporting. I don't know that all the programs need it. It seems to me that the major programs are those that most of the recipients are likely to be on, including food stamps, TANF, EITC. We should content ourselves with getting good reporting on those programs. And if in those connections people are working, fulfilling a requirement, then that's going to take care of the others. So I don't think we need to see this as a general problem. We should focus on the major
I'll
problems.
interject due to limited time. And Mr. Mulligan, I believe we've spoken offline about this issue, and you share that perspective. We should focus more on where most of the money goes, frankly, on reporting requirements for those programs. Is that correct?
Yeah, start with the big pieces. I'd also recommend the Census Bureau run some surveys of the population, especially the poor population, the SIP and the current population survey. Those could be cleaned up and improved in terms for the purpose of measuring program participation more completely, and that would be made administratively more cheap and valuable for research.
And finally, based on these findings, this information gathered, should the federal government incorporate evidence-based funding criteria into these well-intentioned programs? Yes or no, if you can, because my time has expired.
In principle, yes. But we have to sometimes carry out studies to determine what the effects are.
Yeah, I'd say yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Young. Mr. Lewis, you're recognized.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here, except for the Associate Director of CBO and Ms. Randolph. Have either of you been without a job or know someone without a job after 2007? Know someone that didn't have a job or couldn't find a job? Make it brief, please.
Yes, I have friends who have been unemployed.
Okay?
Yes, I've had friends who've been unemployed.
Okay? Yes, sir?
My wife was laid off at the beginning of the year. She's still unemployed.
Okay?
Likewise, yes. Not my wife, but, you know, I've
Okay.
had.
Well, thank you. Did any of the people that you know, any of your friends, try to take relief or seek relief from any of these federal programs?
In the cases I know, I don't know, but I don't believe so.
Okay?
I wouldn't be made aware.
Okay? Yes, sir?
I'm not sure I understood your question.
I think my question is, did anyone you know try to seek out the benefits of these federal programs?
Well, my wife had looked at unemployment insurance, which is a state program.
Okay, that's okay. I think some of the resources come from the federal government.
The answer is yes, but
Okay.
yes.
Well, any of you taking the position that we should just defund these programs and get rid of them and let people fend for themselves?
I'm not in favor of that. My concern is that we require people to work in return for benefits, but I'm not in favor of cutting the benefits. We still need to help people.
So you're not in favor of abolishing the program, that the federal government get out of the business of helping people, throwing people a lifeline?
I don't think the problem in welfare is that we're helping people. The problem is sometimes that we're not expecting people to help themselves.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to Mr. Davis.
Very much, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. You know, the
If I
line
could
of-
just interrupt Mr. Davis very quickly. We have 2 minutes to get over to vote.
All right. Then I'll just say that the line of questioning, I think that we are seeing pursued in some way, is this whole business of, are people likely to not seek work because of the benefit that they might be receiving? The benefits that I've seen people receive generally were not enough to be the kind of reward that might say to a person, I don't really need to go out and seek work as assiduously as someone think, because I'm receiving a benefit that's rather minimal. And I'll continue to pursue that. Our time is obviously up, and we've got to run and vote, but when we return. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. And I apologize to the witnesses. We're going to disappear for a few minutes. We'll be back as soon as we can. If you could please remain. We have just a few more members to ask questions, so I'd ask your patience. The committee hearing now will be in recess.
Yeah, there's a lot of effort. Okay. So, but the one, the first one.
Subcommittee will come to order, please. So thank you for your patience. We'll begin questioning again, and we will recognize Mr. Renacci for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for your testimony. Ms. Randolph, I want to congratulate you for what you've been able to do. I think that is one of the positives of these programs, and we need to have more of those, so congratulations. It's interesting because in my previous history, I used to always have staff come up to me and say, well, the more money we spend, the better off we'll be. And I used to try and tell them that there comes a time when the more money you spend, sometimes you're just wasting it. And I think what we really need to do is make sure that the programs that we're spending money on, that the return is there and that we're getting people back to work. That's got to be the key. Just like Ms. Randolph was able to do. Those are the keys to these type of programs. Mr. Mead, I guess I want to direct a question to you. In December of 2011, approximately 193,000 individuals received TANF benefits in my home state of Ohio. Although shocking to me at first, this number was small in comparison to the 2 million individuals receiving SNAP benefits. In your testimony, you mentioned that other programs could benefit from similar work tests used in a TANF program. Can you tell us more about some of the benefits of a work-first approach to our welfare system, and just a little more in detail? Because I think that's the direction we should go.
In order to get welfare recipients to work, you have to have an administrative structure where you say to them that they must work and you arrange it. You help them get it together by arranging child care, finding a job, actually working, staying at the job, etc. It has to be mandatory, it has to be a condition of eligibility that they do this. And it's not as if, I'm not suggesting they don't want to work, they do, but typically they have to get organized to actually do it. And so you need to have a program structure that brings that about. We have that structure in TANF, but we don't have it in food stamps. That's the big difference. In food stamps, there are formal requirements on the books, but we don't actually have a program standing behind it. We don't actually have, in most localities, there are some exceptions, but we don't have an actual program on the ground where people are faced with an operational requirement to do something. That's the big difference, and we need to move that way in SNAP.
So do you believe that we are providing the real help necessary then to get to that point, or do we have to revise the system?
I think we have to revise SNAP to provide a program structure like what we have in TANF. Now, I don't mean the rules would be identically the same. Food stamps covers a wider population with many different types of families. We have to think seriously about who exactly would have to work and how much and so on. So there are issues there that you wouldn't face in TANF, but we need to do that. We need to set up a structure. That's what is now missing. And then you can combine practical help, which people need, and I'm in favor of, like the benefit, with a requirement that people also help themselves. So you have this joint effort where the government and the recipient together work on going to work.
Ms. Tiller, if you speak to those that are out of work, most will tell you they want a chance to earn more money, help their family, improve their situation in life. Getting individuals back to work really must remain the goal of the public assistance programs. You have assisted a variety of individuals in your organization. Do you come across individuals that are not willing to work?
Of course we do, but it's all about rebuilding confidence and making folks more self-aware, and then helping them with the tools to get them to a point of employability.
What are some of the things your organization does to help people realize the benefits that they can realize from working?
We show them mathematically that work pays. It pays more than perhaps receiving TANF benefits. We do countless trainings that focus on rebuilding their self-awareness, including talking about family structure, then also pre-employment initiatives, resume building, confidence building, presentation, aesthetic presentation, things of that nature.
Mr. Randolph, your goal, it sounds like, and I just want to confirm that, was really to get back to work. You wanted to get to work.
Yes.
So you were just looking really for the tools to help you move in that direction and be able to find a job and find employment for yourself and your child. Is that correct?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Reed, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel. I'm very interested in having a conversation this afternoon about an issue that's very important to me, and that is to focus on the working poor. Because to me, and Mr. Rodriguez, you kind of talked about a little bit in the phase-out situation, is that we have policies now, in my opinion, at the federal level that don't reward the people that are going to work, the ones that we want to stand with, that are pulling themselves out of the turmoil that we all agree that we want to address from Washington. So, Ms. Till, I do want to, from your experience, what are the barriers to reemployment that you come across on a regular basis?
Some of the barriers include limited experience, limited education, limited knowledge of current events. So we work with our participants to make sure that they're trained in pre-employment initiatives to get back to work, and then we address additional education and whatnot.
So are we talking about, when you say education, we're talking like skill sets, workforce development?
Soft skills, hard skills, yes.
Soft skills and hard skills. Now, when you say that, because I've heard that numerous times, and I'm interested in getting it on the record, soft skills, what are you referring to?
Presentation, how you articulate, also anything, your overall being, your self-awareness. That's what I would consider soft skills, your communication skills. Are you organized?
And when you say that, have you ever asked anyone that you've come across in your experience in that situation where you're helping them develop those soft skills, why they didn't have those skills to begin with?
Sure.
And why was that? What was their response?
Variety of reasons. Household composition, limited education.
Okay, household composition, limited education. That's a nice DC term. What do you mean by that?
How they grew up.
How they grew up.
Yep. How they grew up, what their family structure was like.
Okay. And then have you ever come across folks that maybe have a drug problem or an alcohol problem? Is that something, if you could verbally state for the record, that you come across?
Yes, we have.
And is that something that's a big issue, or is that a relatively small, insignificant issue in your experience?
While it is an issue, again, we look at work as the central activity, and then we focus on all of the other barriers that need addressing, and we make sure to warmly refer participants to the appropriate services so that they get complete wraparound services.
And just so I have a sense for the record, is that something that you occasionally come across, or is that something that you regularly come across? Potential drug regularly? Because I'm finding that talking to my workforce development directors and other in the district, and to employers, that's a real issue to reemployment. So I'm glad to hear that verified by you here today. Ms. Randolph, I want to talk about your story. Is really, we can spend a lot of time with the experts here, but your story is really something I want to explore. Clearly, you're setting an example. You're out there doing it right. How does what you do impact your son? Could you state that for the record?
It impacts him greatly. I want to set an example for him to show him that the sky's the limit. He could do anything he put his mind to. So.
And have you had a conversation with him like along those lines, or is it just not do what I say, but do what I do?
Not quite, because he's only 2.
Okay.
So we haven't got there yet. We haven't got there yet.
Well, I will tell you, I'm the father of a 12 and 14-year-old, and I can tell you, and I'm the youngest of 12, so I have 11 older brothers and sisters. And I can tell you that I remember the adage, it's only about 2% of what your parents say that you do. It's what they do that you incorporate and become. And Ms. Tiller, you talked about it on household composition and being reflected in the next generation that's coming down. And Ms. Randolph, if you could you describe your household composition when you were growing up?
Well, I grew up in a single-parent home with just my mom. I had my dad in my life, but it wasn't a marriage or a two-family home. I grew up kind of rough. I grew up kind of rough, but I always knew that education and keep pushing, that I'll be okay. I'll be fine. So I never let my surroundings discourage me or turn me around from what I wanted to do and with the dreams that I wanted to come true. So
And who taught you that education was
My
part of
mom.
the key? Your mom, right?
Yes.
That's what my mom taught me.
yes,
You know, she was a single mother after my father passed when I was 2.
yeah.
And she taught that lesson to me very, very directly. So I appreciate that. Because that is an issue I think that gets lost in our conversation. We talk a lot about the benefits and the cash that we could give to individuals, but we're not talking about the cycle of dependency, the cycle of poverty, and how you break that. And I'm very interested, and Ms. Randolph, I applaud you, because you are setting an example for that 2-year-old that I can assure you, in my humble opinion, will pay huge dividends, not only for him, but his kids and your grandkids. So God bless you. Keep up the great work. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Mr. Davis, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here this afternoon. Ms. Randolph, let me congratulate you for the progress that you have made. It seems to me that I know thousands of individuals like yourself. I've lived and worked in the inner city of Chicago all of my adult life, and so I've seen individuals. Do you have friends and family members, perhaps, who've had similar experiences and are having similar success to yours?
No,
No?
no.
Ms. Tiller, let me ask you, do you know other agencies and organizations that are having the kind of success that you're having with your programs?
I can only speak to America Works.
So you don't check other programs and how effective they are, or read literature about what they do?
Well, sure, I read about them. I know of others in existence, but today I'm only speaking to America Works.
Okay. Mr. Kling, I note that spending for the kind of programs that we're talking about have increased tremendously over the years. Are there any societal conditions that may have spurned some of this, or do we see any results like a difference perhaps in life expectancy since 1972, since much of this has gone to health care?
There are some important societal trends, just like basic population growth is a big driver of why the number of participants has gone up a lot in many programs. In the healthcare programs, there's a general rise in healthcare costs per participant that affects the Medicaid program that reflects a societal trend. Yes, sir.
And I note that in some communities, especially where there have been certain kinds of programs, that the infant mortality rates, for example, have been reduced. That is, that people not only live perhaps longer, but they live a bit better. And so I'm thinking that some of that might be accounted for as a result of the increased expenditures. Dr. Milligan, let me thank you for being here. You come from one of my most favorite institutions. One of the things I bemoan a little bit sometimes is that the University of Chicago is not in my congressional district, although I have a large number of other colleges and universities, but not the University of Chicago. Let me ask you if you've observed the impact of the availability of work opportunities on whether or not people are employed, or what does opportunity have to do with unemployment in some settings?
Maybe the good way to answer your question would be that the figure 1 in my testimony, where I view the reward to work as a comparison between what you can get when you're not working and what you get when you're working. And I think what you meant by opportunities, what would happen if you could get more while working. if you could get a better job or more high-paying job. And that increases the reward. And on average, not every single individual responds this way, but on average, when people have a bigger reward, they respond to it by working more. That's fairly clear as an average proposition.
On the availability of work in my mind, I'm reminded that when I came to Chicago and the community that I live in, there were solidly good-paying manufacturing jobs all over the place. I can name at least 20 major corporations and companies that were located there. And so the individuals in the community where I lived basically had jobs. They Hot Point, Motorola, General Electric, International, Harvester, Sears, you name it, they were there. And so my question really was about the impact of job availability. I see that my time has expired, Mr. Chairman. So.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all for being here. I think, Ms. Randolph, what you said was probably the most important thing, and I know that you're actually you're the person doing these things. You've actually been through it. You've been through the programs, because I think what Ms. Tiller did, when you said, they gave me confidence, I think that's the key to it. I can't imagine waking up in the morning and having no reason to get out of bed. Now, I know we come up with programs and they're well-intentioned, but when you disincent people to go after something, when you take away their hopes and dreams, you're kind of reinforcing the fact, you know what, we're going to allow you to stay where you are. We're going to give you enough money to stay where you are. These programs were not designed to keep people in poverty. They were designed to lift them out of poverty. The skills that you learned, though, gave you the confidence to go in and apply for a job. The town that I'm in now has seen heavy, heavy unemployment. And I have young people coming up to me all the time and say, you know, Mr. Kelly, are there any jobs that you know about? And I said, go to the workforce people, talk to them. I don't know how to do those jobs that they're available. So you wonder about, what are we doing with folks? Because if the idea is to help them, give them a bridge from where they are to where they want to be, that works. I mean, that's what worked for you. I can see it in your eyes. You're a confident young lady. You said, I knew I was a smart girl. And so I knew you had the confidence, but then they helped you build it so you could go before a job, when you were seeking a job, and speak with confidence to get the job. And that's really, I mean, you're doing that. How many more people would you say fall in that category, but they just don't have that confidence yet to go out and look for a job or to interview for a job? Yeah, either one of you, because you're both working with great numbers of people. You created 350,000 jobs, or at least got people jobs, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So thousands per month in offices nationwide.
Okay, all right. See, I get the confusions because sometimes we think, well, you know what? You know, our hearts are willing, but sometimes our wallets are weak. And we talk about we want to help people, but then we say, but there's only so much we can do. See, I don't believe for 1 minute by disincenting people that you're helping them. I don't want to give people enough money to stay where they are. I want to give them an opportunity to dream again. Mr. Mead, availability of jobs. Are there enough jobs out there for folks, or where are we with that?
There's no definitive proof, but I would say jobs of a low-skilled, low-paid variety are widely available in America today. The indications are that low-income people can get jobs quickly. The problem is more keeping the jobs. Their problem is far more obtaining an adequate wage to enter the middle class. That's been true for decades. This is not a new problem. But the major difficulty, though, for this group is not that they're working at low wages. 2/3 of the poor didn't work at all in the last year. And it isn't because they can't get a job. It's that they're doing other things. Their lives are preoccupied with other concerns. They're not saying in survey studies that I can't get a job. Only 12% of the non-working poor adults in 2011, or I think it's, 12, no, I forget, the latest year anyway, 12% say that the reason is they can't find a job. Vastly more important are concerns in private life. They're retired, they're taking care of the family, they're ill, they're in school. Those are much more important. So people are not saying they can't get a job.
Okay, and now going back to Ms. Randolph. Okay, you have a little boy?
Yes.
All right, 2 years old.
Yes.
See, when I was growing up, I mean, the central part of who we are as a people has always been the family. It's always been centered around the family unit. The ability of the mother and the father to work together to provide a future for their children, to provide well-being for them. And I look at some of these programs, and I'm saying, well, why are we telling people that, you know, if you're married, we're going to penalize you for being married? We don't, it seems to me like we don't reward good behavior, but we make people think about, well, maybe it's better if I'm not married, I can benefit more from not being married. I would just say maybe short-term, but not long-term. I heard you talk about your family and the way your family was structured. So, I mean, you all see it every day.
Yeah.
We see it in this country. As our families continue to crumble, as we don't have that family nucleus, we lose what it is that is uniquely American.
Yeah.
And that is to provide for those coming after us with a great deal of heart and a great deal of passion. But is that not happening? I mean, I just see it. I can't believe the numbers that we look at now of unmarried people with children. It's a tough road to hoe even when you're married, but even unmarried, unless you incentivize it. Could we change it? Would that help?
I don't believe, as I've said, that incentives are the core problem. The core problem is the lack of a structure that promotes and enforces work connected to these welfare programs. We need to have a program in which there are case managers who make sure that those who want to work actually do it and help them sort out the problems and so on. It's not going to happen automatically, and it's not going to happen in response to incentives. Incentives are, I believe, a distraction from the main difficulties, which are actually administrative. We need to do with food stamps and these other programs what we have already done with TANF. Set up a structure where if you get support, you are reliably required also to work. We have to do that. And when we do that, we will see results.
Well, getting up with a purpose every morning is the key to it. You've got to have that, whether it's that 2-year-old little boy that's driving you or just you're wanting to be part of a society that continues to make things better for those coming after us. So I've used up all my time. Thank you all for being here, and thank you so much for what you're doing. Congratulations. Keep up the good work.
Mr. Crowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Randolph, it's a pleasure to have you here before us this afternoon, and congratulations to you on all your success, and I wish you nothing but more success in the years to come for you and your little boy and for your family, your overall family. I just have a couple of questions for you, though, if I could, just to get a better sense of your situation and how we can apply that to others.
Okay.
When you were moving into your position last year, you apparently were aware of the Earned Income Tax Credit. Is that correct?
Yes.
And how did you find out about that?
For the tax year, I found out about it once, I guess I applied for my taxes.
Okay, so did your accountant tell you, or did?
Yeah.
So they told you. Did you receive any information about continuing medical coverage under Medicare if needed, under Medicaid if needed?
Did I receive any information?
Yeah, that if you needed to continue health care, that you would have access to Medicaid if you needed it?
Yes, I did.
And did you receive any explanation about getting any help with daycare expenses for your child?
Yes,
You did. Are you now receiving any of these supports like EITC or transitional Medicaid or child care subsidies?
yes,
You are receiving those subsidies?
yes.
Thank you. Ms. Tiller, when one of your clients leaves the TANF program for a full-time job but receives assistance with child care or transitional Medicaid, or in fact gets EITC, do you think that person is as a welfare recipient or as a worker?
As a worker.
As a worker. I appreciate your response because I think that gets in part to the crux of what we're talking about here. Those would imply that EITC, or even on transitional Medicaid, or receiving even child care subsidies so that they can work and the child can be in an enriching environment, that's a form of welfare. Some on this committee believe that that's another form of welfare. I don't believe so, Ms. Randolph. I think what you're doing is more than admirable. It is heroic. It's heroic what you're doing. And I hope that there are millions more like you out in the world. It's what makes America great. So thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, in your testimony, you mentioned some of the benefits of EITC, including long-term gains in education and earnings by recipients. Can you elaborate a bit more on the broader economic benefits of the EITC program and other tax credits for working families? When families receive these credits, what impact does their resulting spending have on our overall economy?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I mean, I think there's, as I mentioned, some really good studies out there that really show, not to mention the anecdotal evidence of people who are working directly with families to get tax credits each year. It pumps millions of dollars, billions of dollars into the economy, millions of dollars in local economies, as well helps families to certainly pay off bills, but also do employment-related things like buy cars that take them to work and pay for other transportation, child care costs, other kinds of things that I think are have tremendous employment effects as well. And I think the research that we cited around long-term effects on families and kids in families who are receiving the tax credits, I think stands for itself.
Thank you. So it seems that we're talking about programs that not only strengthen the individual, but strengthen all of us, lift all boats, and also improves the overall economy of our country. I hope that the benefits of these valuable programs and the very real need for these resources are not overlooked in a rush to claim credit for cutting so-called welfare. Don't forget, our Constitution has in it that it will to provide for the general welfare. When did the word welfare become so maligned? When did it become a negative and a pejorative as opposed to something positive, as apparently our founding fathers had thought so when they included that line in the preamble of our Constitution? I particularly want to thank Ms. Tiller for your comments when I asked about the question about whether you thought that those programs, as it applied to Ms. Randolph, were a form of welfare, and you said they were not. And I think it's a very honest answer, and I appreciate that very much because I think it goes to the heart of what we're talking about here today, that these programs are not forms of welfare. They're helping lift people up who are struggling, who are working in this country and trying to make ends meet. That's what Ms. Randolph is doing every day as she's working in this company, this healthcare company. And I applaud her and I applaud you for your forthright answer. Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Thank all of you for being here today, and thanks for your patience as we left for a few minutes to vote. I'd like to especially thank Ms. Randolph for her appearance here today. Sometimes Congress can be a little intimidating for any of us, but especially for someone who's not been here before. We are excited about your progress. People have mentioned that. You've been sort of the focal point. You're sitting in the center, and everyone is kind of drawn to you and your smile and your success. And, you know, the federal government, I think we would all agree, does have a role in helping people get back on their feet. We must be there. And I hope that you continue to receive these benefits and you continue to move on in your life and look for promotions and not only buy your first car, but end up buying your first home. And I can see you're already planning that by nodding your head. So we just, all of us are just honored to have you here and appreciate all the work that all of you in the panel have done. We want to get this right. We want to be able to be here as a help to people, but we want to have people like Ms. Randolph who stand up too and take responsibility, want to move forward with their life, and the government is here to help you move forward. And maybe one day you might even work for the federal government and you can say to people, I'm from the federal government and I'm here to help. Maybe not. Thank you all very much. The hearing is adjourned.